Alright, so welcome to the fourth video in our series looking at creating a prototype for our digital solution. And so in the last lesson, or the last video I should say, we looked at creating the interface elements for our screens so that we can actually interact with our prototype. So the interface elements were created in our Kivy file, so we looked at using widgets, grid layouts to set up our sub-elements, and then obviously labels, text inputs, and buttons. So what we're going to focus on today is using these buttons and these methods that we've declared to actually transition between our screens. And in saying that, there is two parts of this transition. So firstly, for each of these screens, we're going to have some sort of method that we want to apply, and if we successfully applied that method, we then want to allow for the transition of the screens. And so those methods appear within our object library. Okay, so just a quick rundown. What we're going to do is have the login screen, and when the user is logged in, we then look at creating a task and inputting that into our system. And then once that's created, we want to look at taking that task back out. And the button on the task output will simply log out and return us back to the login screen. Okay, so as we said, there's two parts of this. The first part, you might have seen I've done one here earlier, is in the login user method within the user object. We want to return a true value. So basically at the moment, it's always going to say that the user's credentials are valid. Whatever we type in, it's going to return a true value. So we're just saying for the moment, while we're testing that we can transition between screens, we simply just want to create or say that that's always true. We'll look at how do we add in our algorithm for login user and how we can return different values in a future video. So once we've established that we've got a return value of true, we then need to look at how do we use that to transition through the screens. We do so through the main Python file. So the first thing we need to do in order to establish the use of that method is we do need to create an instance of the user object. So actually we need to call it user1. You could call it whatever we like really. But from the library, we want to create an instance of our user. And so if we go back to our Python library and our user object, you can see that when we initialize it, we need to include 4 attributes. It's username, password, name, and type. Okay, so to do that, we'll just use A, B, C, and D. Actually, probably even smarter than that. We'll say user, password, name, and their type. So then I guess later when we go to looking at adding in specific examples, we can look at that. Alright, so now that we have our user, we can use an if statement to get that true value. Actually, before we do that, we'll run it. So we'll create another variable called login success, and this will actually hold that true or false value from our method. So user1 dot, and then we say login user. Alright, so that's going to run our login method, and as we said, it's always going to return true. So then if we have login success, we then want to transition to our task input screen. And so to do that, we're going to refer to from this login screen object. We want to access the manager. So that's the screen manager object that we created in our initial app build. And we want to get the current screen. So the current screen, we want to actually set that from login screen to, we'll call it new task. So it's going to be the screen where we input a new task. All right, so if we save and run that now, it should give us an error. It does not. I believe the error will occur when I actually press the button. So as we said, we should be able to put in anything. So random letters, some numbers and letters, why not? And then when we click on that, it does give us an error. And so I already knew that was going to occur. And the reason for that is because we've given it this current screen is going to be set to new task, but it doesn't actually know what new task is yet. And that's the bit that we've missed from our KV file. So in our KV file for each screen, so before we even add in the widget object, I'm going to create an attribute called name. All right, so this one we'll just call it login. The task input screen, so name. And this one we call new task with the capital T, using a bit of camel case. And then our task output name, let's go with show task, just something a bit different. Control S is your friend, save your work as you go. Alright, so now we can access that new task. You might have picked up the error message down here, no screen with name new task. So when you see that, it either refers to the fact that you haven't set the name in the KV file, or alternatively, you've spelled this wrong here. It's not the same as what it is in the KV file. Okay, so now when we run this, we should be more successful. So again, we've got our user. We can even leave it blank. It will still be successful because it's always true. Now when we click the login button, you can see that it transitions to our new task screen. The proportions are a little bit out with the button. Again, that comes back to the way we set up the grid layout, but we can always polish that later once we get the functionality up and running. Remember, we are only trying to create a prototype of our solution. All right, at the moment, the add task button does nothing. That's because we haven't coded it yet. All right, so we're going to repeat that process essentially for those other methods. All right, so you can see something similar with our task input screen. So basically, we're going to want to create a task that will hold all this information. So I'm looking at the wrong part. So we want to create a task instance that will obviously hold all of this information. And then we want to add the task to our database and obviously then view the task when we go to the task output stage. So because the actual method attached to this transition is the adding of the task, we're going to return a true value purely for testing purposes. And then we can go and complete something similar to what we have up here. So task 1 equals library.task. And then we just quickly see how many we need. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elements. So just go type all these out. In strings though. Actually, they're probably ID would be a number. So let's just go number 1. there is a date. So pretty handy to for date. Okay, due. I said I wasn't going to do this, but there's a few there. And the others, so maybe time would be a number 2. That's what we're up to. F, G, and time. Let's go. All right, so we've got a bit of structure there. We like I said, we fixed up later. It's really just create an instance of the object. So then task success. So for task 1, there you go. Add task. So I just want to make sure I was using camel case. And if we do have a success with adding the task, which obviously we automatically will, again, self.manager.current equals show task. So that was the name that we gave the task output page. All right, so save that. Give it a quick test. We should get through the login screen, the task input screen to the task output screen. So if we give this a run onto the screen so everyone can see. So we can log in. Yep, success. Add our task. Success. No. Bool object is not callable. So if it's because I put it as a method. That's my fault. Small typo there. But again, always good to see that we don't get things 100% right the first time. Or the 100th time maybe in my case. So we add a task and we're now at the task output stage. Remember we had the dynamic text inputs, so we haven't actually got any values there yet. But that's okay, we will get to that. All right, so we're left with adding in our task input method, which is going to log us out. And this one is going to be slightly different. So if we look at our methods, or sorry, our object library, we want to be able to view the task. So we're going to return that as a true value. But we need to get the data and be able to view our task before we display it on screen. Okay, so when we press that, no, sorry, so it won't be when we press this button, it'll be on loading of the screen. So what we can do is create a new method, and this one is automated by Python. So on enter, we're simply going to say if view task, no. Again, we need to create the object. So again, actually, let's just borrow it from up here. So on enter, we need to obviously have our task object ready to go. If we view success, we'll call it, equals task1.task. If we have a view success, we obviously then want to display the page. So we'll just continue for the time being. Actually doesn't like that. We'll just pass. We don't really particularly want anything at that point. This will probably be more of a error trapping sort of setup. So if there is success, we don't really necessarily need to do anything else. All right, so that's an example of how we can do a test before we press the button. All right, we'll run a method before a button is pressed. So because it's when we enter the screen, we want that task to occur. But the pressed method, what we want to do when we press it is we just want to log out. So when we have a look at our system, we don't actually have a log out method. And that's perfectly okay. You know, when we're developing our prototypes, we often find mistakes that are made in our initial planning. So in our class diagram, we didn't include a logout method. And that's obviously something that you could annotate to and speak to. In terms of next time, you know, if I've got to log in, I'm gonna make sure I have a log out. And there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. So logging out. All right, and again, because we're just in testing, we're going to return a true value. So save our library, also save our main file. Just notice the white dot. All right, so if task one dot log out, you can see a bit of an error here. So the issue with that being with our on enter is that this becomes a local variable. So what we can do is put it here, and it now becomes a global variable for each of our methods that we have for our task output. But you'll notice when we do that, it gives us a error at the task one. So we just have to say self.task1 to say within this object, that task one that we've created, we want a view task. The same deal here. So you can see that you can actually set the tasks, or the users in this case here, at the actual object level, and create, for that instance, this is the particular user. So if you want to do multiple things like updating details or deleting details, that sort of thing, you can include that within a singular method. You just have to create the attribute in this case as global to this object. Obviously, this isn't global to all of the objects, so you still would have to recreate it here in task input, for example. If you were to do that, you'd want to create it as a global variable, sort of at this level outside of the object. Okay, so if we log out successfully, we then just want to go self manager current is equal to our login screen. So we now have transitions between each of our screens. We've also included an on enter method. So let's give it a run and see if we can get into a bit of a loop of our login screen, going into our add task, going into our view task. I need to change the name on that button, I just realized. And then log out does not have that attribute. What did I do wrong? Oh, it's because it's in user. That's my fault. I had it as a task. Obviously, that's not the case. So I guess what I did there wasn't necessarily required, but that's okay. Just adjusting here. So user one equals the user. Actually, what I might do, because the user will be quote unquote logged in, might create them as a global object like that. So now we can just say user one. Oh no, sorry, that one's still task one. Got myself a bit twisted there. User one, log out. Okay, that makes more sense. So we can go log in, add task, and log out, and we're back to the login screen. Fantastic, and you'll see that just keeps going round and round. So before we forget, let's go change this button to log out. Okay, so we now have interaction between the slides, and we also have our initial attachment to our methods. So in the next video, what we'll look at is starting to flesh out those methods. So applying our pseudocode and actually creating the functionality of our algorithms.